We're back, we're talking FF7, we're talking Rebirth, and we're here to look at those interviews I mentioned with yesterday's video. We have, I think, 3 of them. There's 2 Korean ones, and there's another interview from Hobby Consoles. We looked at them relatively recently, where they have, like, different articles for, like, individual, like, question and answers. It's kind of weird, but to put out one for Sephiroth. But with some of these Korean interviews, we have Kitase talking about, like, he thinks the ending for Rebirth is good, but it's obviously going to be subjective from person to person. Not wanting to answer whether or not, like, the Red Armor guy from the trailers, Gilgamesh, and so that, like, the fan response to the ending of Rebirth might kind of reflect what happens into the 3rd game or something along those lines, which you've kind of heard before, but still probably worth discussing, and maybe a few other things too. So let's hop into it. So we're just going to hop right into it. And we're going to use Shinra Archaeology department for some of these translations, but we might look at some stuff ourselves here and there. Kitase On Red decided something very early in FF7's development that has remained since then. Within the FF7 universe, there's no one better than Sephiroth. He'll always be the strongest, the most powerful, and the most evil there is. And it's really that last part that's people talking, because saying that Sephiroth is the most evil in the FF7 universe, I think is subjective maybe, but I think in a lot of ways just objectively wrong, because I think objectively Hojo's a worse person, like more evil. And if we're going to talk just kind of the nature of evil, like Genova's more evil. And without those two, there's no Sephiroth, right? Without Genova's existence, no Sephiroth. And then even with Genova's existence, without any Hojo and Hojo's experimentations, we don't have the Sephiroth that we know now, right? Sephiroth would have just been a regular-ass person that grew up. He might have been strong naturally or something, but he wouldn't be the guy that we know now, right? So, like, objectively, I would say those two entities are more evil than Sephiroth. Also, we're just going to talk evil than Sephiroth's mother, right? Lucrezia, allowing Hojo to do that. Whether she was forced into it, talked into it, I don't give a shit. Allowing that to happen, evil as fuck. Not to be, you know, like a Genova simp or anything over here. Maybe it's the eyeball titty calling me, distracting me, I don't know. But depending on her species, which, you know, really, we don't really know anything about, you might not be able to consider her evil either. I know she's, like, intelligent, she's sentient. She even talks in the original FF7 a little bit, like one scene, I think. But if that's what her species does, if her species just goes from, like, planet to planet and just kind of assimilates and takes over, it's just the nature of her species, right? You almost couldn't label that evil either, technically speaking. It's just because that's what they do, right? It's like saying, like, a parasite's evil. Parasite's not really evil. That's just what they do, right? So technically, in some ways, she might not even be evil, but for sure Hojo's, like, worse than Sephiroth, right? Like, he's the worst. We can certainly agree that Sephiroth is, like, the strongest, the baddest there is, that whole thing, but just saying evil. Evil is just a weird way to do it. And even technically speaking, actually, if we're going to get really into this conversation here, he's not the strongest, because Cloud's beat his ass 3 times, right? Like, him in the party at the end of FF7, then, like, the solo fight at the end of FF7, and then at the end of fucking Having Children, where Cloud beats his ass yet again. Like, Cloud's 3-0 on my guy, right? So, you know what? No, this whole entire fucking thing's wrong. I disagree with everything about it. We're just going to keep tumbling down the rabbit hole here, actually. We're like 4-0, maybe 5-0 against Sephiroth, because Bizarre Sephiroth and Save for Sephiroth are literally different boss fights, different entities. Still Sephiroth, though. That's 2 losses right there. Then the solo fight, then Having Children, and then now with Remake, at the end of Remake, we beat his ass. We obviously don't defeat him, like kill him or whatever, but we beat his ass. So, I mean, that's like 5 right there. So, God, Sephiroth sucks, doesn't he? He's nothing. Anyways, we spent way too much time on that. Let's move on. Hamaguchi says the Cloud in the FF7 Rebirth Nibelheim flashback is slightly different from the Cloud most people know. He's rougher, more of a novice, a less experienced character. So that right there is actually nothing important right there, because this is beyond known if you're an FF7 fan. But I found it kind of funny, because with this interview, like, they're being vague about what's going on with Cloud, right? They're like, wow, he's slightly different, a bit more of a novice. It's kind of strange, right? Whereas we looked at another interview not too long ago, I don't remember where exactly, where Hamaguchi was like, Cloud's acting like Zack. Like, he just straight up says that shit. Like, his mannerisms are just like Zack, aren't they? Or something along those lines. It's kind of weird, where it's like, why should we be vague here, and then in other interviews you're just, like, giving away that twist? Which, again, as I always say, is why I think things will be different. Cloud learning the truth soon, or something along those lines. Because, like, in other interviews, they're just like, this is Zack. That's not Cloud, essentially. That revelation when it comes to the original Final Fantasy VII is, like, the biggest twist, right? You have, like, the biggest things in that game are Aerith's death, and the revelation that, you know, Cloud isn't who he's been saying he is this whole game, right? Like, nothing he said is technically true, sort of, right? Like, his personality, everything about him isn't really him, man. And, like, they just kind of give that away in interviews with the re-release of Crisis Core, you know, last December. That spoils that shit, too. It's just, like, it's weird. So I don't know how they're going to do it with the remake project, especially since it's supposed to be for new players and old players. I don't know what they're going to do. When asked if FF7 Rebirth will follow the OG, as Kitase recently said, it would connect to avid children, Kitase says they've made sure people can experience the OG story they're looking forward to. However, with Zack now appearing as a leading character, slight deviations are in store. So again, that's not really anything new, stuff we talked about a lot here recently, but something that I've seen people talk about on social media that I kind of starting to agree with a little bit is like them just kind of going back and forth on this, things not changing, things staying the same or whatever. It's just kind of like a marketing thing to keep us talking, essentially. With the previous interview we looked at, we had like Kitase saying they're not deviating from the path, essentially, or whatever. But in that same interview, like Hamaguchi was saying that he kind of disagrees with what they should be doing with the sequel. They wanted to do some changes. They don't want people to like think they know what's going to happen, that sort of thing. And then this interview, Kitase is like, well, they're going to have the OG FF7, but also there is going to be new stuff, a little bit of new stuff because of Zack or whatever. And it's just like, essentially, it's just like a marketing tool to get us talking, and it's, I guess, working. This isn't like a revelation. This isn't anything new. I'm just like mentioning it though in the video. Asked if the red armor glimpsed during the TGS stage footage belongs to Gilgamesh, Kitase confirms it is red armor, but says he can't reveal whom it belongs to. He says there is much to enjoy in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth wide world map, including elements that weren't in the original. I mean, obviously in like a random interview, they're not going to spoil what this is, but the helmet does kind of match certain variants of Gilgamesh in other Final Fantasy games. Gilgamesh has appeared in a lot of the games. We've already talked about this a lot, but he's not appeared in the FF7 universe for some reason. And the lore of him is that he can like travel to just different like dimensions or timelines or universes or however the fucking lore works from like I think Final Fantasy V. And we've seen him have the Buster Sword in Final Fantasy XII specifically, like a replica of it, which means he should have visited the FF7 world, technically speaking. So I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if it's not, I don't know who. If it's not Gilgamesh, it's significantly less interesting, whatever it is. Actually, speaking of that, I don't remember what the comment said exactly. I think it was in our last video with the Pararelics, I think it was, like the side content stuff from Rebirth where there's like space-time fluctuations and there's like phenomena and stuff. I think somebody actually mentioned in my comments that it could be related to Gilgamesh. And it's possible that like Gilgamesh is related to that. Like if you do all the Pararelics or whatever in the game, essentially, it like leads to Gilgamesh or some shit like that. Maybe that's why those are appearing with like him, coming to our world or whatever, coming to the Rebirth world or something. I don't know. It's a good idea at least. Asked if having the world map already created in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will speed up production of Part 3. Kitase says it's hard to discuss the next entry at this early stage, but he suspects development knowledge gained from creating such an open game will contribute to the next title. I don't see what the harm is in just saying yeah, because obviously it literally will. Like, this game is going to span most of the planet, right? Almost all the continents. We're not going to hit Wutai. We're going to hit even a little bit of the North Continent, but we don't know how much. Maybe we go to North Crater, maybe we don't. We know we're going to Forgotten Capital for sure. But we're going to have most of the planet explored. So, like, Part 3 is just going to be, like, the Wutai, rest of the North Continent, and, like, maybe the ocean and shit, if we get to explore the ocean with a submarine. But it's, like, the majority of the world's done in this game. So, like, clearly it's going to make the third game go a little bit faster at the very least. Kitase says he personally thinks Rebirth has a good ending. However, different people receive stories in different ways. He says players' impressions and analysis of the story may be reflected in the next game. So he hopes people will discuss Rebirth's ending a lot. So that first part with Kitase talking about, like, liking the ending, but it's maybe other people won't or something because it's like subjective or whatever. It's kind of like ominous because it feels like I think the ending's good, but I don't know how you guys are going to receive it, sort of thing, or some of you are going to receive it. So, and the whole like taking in feedback is, I mean, whatever. We've heard that before. People were worried about that in the past, but every fucking game sequel takes in feedback from the previous game. It's nothing new. The first part did remind me of, we got like a quote some time ago from, I believe, Kitase, where he kind of talked about there being a cliffhanger or some shit at the end of Rebirth, like kind of like get people hooked in and like talking and discussing and anticipating the third game. Specifically, it said in a BBC interview, what happens there, talking about the Forgotten Capital, is going to be a big surprising development and hooked to get people interested and motivated to want to see what happens in the final part of this series. And I know we've obviously discussed that before, but like there's only like two options there, and it's either Aerith dies or Aerith lives. Now, specifically, it's either Aerith dies and then something happens afterwards that gets us talking, because they're not going to just have Aerith be killed by Sephiroth and then fade to black and that's it. Because there's no conversation there. I don't know what's going to happen afterwards if she dies. That would get us talking for the next couple of years and theorizing and stuff like that. I don't know what it could be. But that's like option one. And the other option is Aerith living, and that's what would obviously motivate a shit ton of conversation if she survives somehow. I don't know how. Cloud saves her. She moves out of the way when Sephiroth goes to stab her. Zack shows up and protects her, saves her, sacrifices himself to save her. I don't know what would happen there if she lived, but it's only one of those two options because they can't just cut to black when Aerith dies. Like I don't know what they're gonna do. So it's very interesting, but I kind of forgot about that in recent videos when we talked about things changing, because to me that feels like there's got to be a change, because it can't just be Aerith dying, right? I don't know what happens post Aerith dying if she does. I'm just not entirely sure what the changes could be, right? Like, if she does die, I just don't know what you do after that that gets us talking for the foreseeable future. And if it's just the FF7 story going forward, what's the grab that gets people like talking for the next like 3 to 4 years while we're waiting on the third part? I don't know what it is, because if we're just following FF7 going forward, we know what the fuck's happening. So it's got to be some difference, right? As we always talk about. Anyways, just kind of going back to what Kitase said there, it's kind of a weird answer, like him saying I like it, but people receive stories in different ways, like kind of setting us up for or some people for kind of like maybe a disappointing ending in some ways, because it's kind of weird to even say that. Why would you even say it at all? To say like, I like the ending, I think it's pretty good. That's it. Like, why would you say like, kind of like hint around that people might not like it in some ways or some shit? I don't know. So it's very weird, and I don't know what that'd be. If Aerith dies like we expect her to, sort of, because of the original FF7, like, I don't know what you do after that has people going, I don't know if I like this, or whatever the fuck, right? So it's kind of, I don't know. It's just interesting. Actually, before we close out the video here, on the idea of them like taking in fan feedback for the third part, we've known for a long time, I think like a couple years now, that they have like a through line for what's going on in the whole story for the remake trilogy, right? And I don't think fan feedback would change the story that much. If like fans hate like the first game, they just completely alter the second game sort of stuff. But maybe it's possible that they do have like multiple like scenarios for like the same story, as in like just the Zack stuff, like the ending of remake being like ambiguous on whether or not Zack is alive or dead, right? And maybe fan feedback, if maybe it determines whether he's alive or not. Like if the fan feedback was like super negative for some reason that Zack's alive, that like they're like, oh no, he's been dead the whole time. Like they have that kind of in the pocket ready to go sort of thing before they even start making the second game or whatever, you know, stuff like that. Like I don't know if they maybe that's possible, but besides that scenario, I don't think fan feedback's gonna like completely alter the game. That's just kind of ridiculous to think, even because we already know that they're already working on the third game right now. So that'll be pretty much the video. So of course, pass off to you guys. You can talk about whatever you want in the comment section in terms of, do you think Sephiroth is the most evil character in all of FF7? I personally, I know he's like the big bad villain, but in terms of like evil, I don't know, man. I kind of just got to disagree with that. I think Hojo's worse at the very least. And kind of anything else that we talked about in this video in terms of like Kitase having like thinking the ending's good for Rebirth, but maybe other people won't like it. Like, what are your thoughts on that and kind of anything else? Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to if you guys are new to in the description below. Follow me to #DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.